one of the things that you need to know is that the Supreme Court of the United States yesterday released something else on its emergency or shadow docket. This is a docket that used to be used in the case where the Supreme Court had to hand down an emergency decision because something was going to happen very quickly. And under Trump, this Supreme Court has used this emergency or shadow docket really quite frequently for things that are not emergencies. And the trick to these decisions that are handed down under the shadow docket are that they are not argued, so there are not hearings on them, and they are issued without a decision explaining what the Supreme Court's reasoning was. So we're getting more and more of these decisions that simply are handed down and we do not know what the logic of them is. And that's really deeply problematic for a number of reasons, not least because the theory behind having a nation based in the law is that things change very, very gradually so that people can plan ahead and that they know what's coming and that there is a body of law to which someone can point to say, this is how we got to where we are. And the shadow docket does not do that. Anyway, what they handed down yesterday was problematic in a really major way, aside from that. And that is that they put a hold, called a stay, on a federal judge's determination that the Trump administration could not fire about 1,400 employees in the Department of Education. Let me unpack that a little bit. Trump, before he took office, insisted that he wanted to get rid of the Department of Education because he said it was pushing woke curriculum onto America's school children. In fact, the Department of Education has nothing to do with curriculum. That's determined at the state and local levels, always has been, which is itself a rabbit hole that I would love to go into, but I will spare you. But he wanted to get rid of it, and that was his reasoning. But in fact, what the Department of Education has done is it has dispersed funds to poverty heavy regions, localities that are from fairly poor communities, and it provided funds to enable children with disabilities to get educations. It also protected civil rights in the schools, protecting for racial and sex inequality in the schools, which is what the administration really seemed to be unhappy about. And that's gone all the way back to Reagan. So in order to do that, they, in March, announced that they were reducing the number of people at the Department of Education pretty much by half, and that they were going to fire those people and move the pieces of the Department of Education they wanted to keep into other departments, and that this was, their way to get rid of what they considered this woke curriculum. Now, just to be clear, what's at stake here is huge. It's even bigger than the Department of Education. And that's that Congress is the only branch of the federal government that has the power to write laws. So when the framers wrote the Constitution, there are 3 articles that begin the Constitution, and then it goes on into other things. The first of those articles is the one that lays out the rights and duties of Congress. And Congress is made up of the House of Representatives and the Senate. Those are the only bodies that are allowed to write legislation. The president, which is in Article 2, has the duty to see that those laws are enforced. The trick to Trump trying to get rid of the Department of Education is that Congress established the Department of Education by law and funded it by law. So for him to come in and say, we're going to get rid of this, is the executive assuming lawmaking powers that he does not have. And that is something that the courts have always stood against. And that there was really never any doubt about this. When President Nixon tried to do something similar and the Supreme Court said, dude, ain't happening, right? I paraphrase, that's not actually what they said, but they said it wasn't going to happen. This Supreme Court, without any explanation for why, said it was okay for the president to go ahead and make the cuts in that Department of Education while litigation is ongoing over whether or not those cuts are legal. So essentially rewarding him for trying to break the law. So that raises another big question, and that's something really to be watching. If you are looking at how the courts are deciding cases involving Trump's actions, of the actions of the administration, the lower courts are siding against him at extremely high rates. In that is regardless of who appointed the judges in making the decisions. They're pretty consistently siding against him. The Supreme Court is pretty consistently siding in his favor. And that's a really big problem because it certainly appears to be that the Supreme Court is trying to create this super powerful president, like they set out to do just about a year ago in the Donald J. Trump versus United States decision of July 1st, 2024, in which they said that a president could not be prosecuted for exercising his powers during his presidency. And the Trump administration has used that statement really to say we can do pretty much anything. And there's a trick in that, though. In that decision, the Supreme Court basically said, well, because nobody's ever made this argument before, we, the courts, and by that they meant the Supreme Court, are going to be the body that determines what the president can do and what the president cannot do. And it's pretty clear that they are enabling a Republican president, but they would not say that a Democratic president could do the same thing. And in fact, their shadow docket, I think always, but at least almost always, decided against President Joe Biden, while it is now deciding for President Donald Trump. And if you think about the larger scheme of the American government, the three branches of government, what this is the Supreme Court claiming the power essentially to determine what the Congress and the president can do. And remember that this Supreme Court has been stacked with far-right justices. So what you're seeing is a very, very small minority of the American people having supported these six justices. But you're really seeing six people determining the country that has 334 million people in it. And this is a really, really big problem, obviously.